Hello student, welcome back. Today we're going to discuss about agricultural transformation and rural development. You can find the material in chapter 9 in your textbook by Todaro. Okay, so let us begin. So in this chapter we will discuss a lot about the agricultural transformation, especially in the developing countries. Okay. So, if you remember, last week or few weeks back before the midterm exam, we have discussed about industrialization, right? But actually, uh, there is something missing in there. So the truth is, the role of industry is huge in an economy. That is correct, but also the role of agricultural field. Okay, so the heavy emphasis in the past on rapid industrialization may have been misplaced. This is what I just say to you. Agricultural development is now seen as important part of any development strategy. So what's important for the development of an economy is not exclusively only the industry but also the agriculture. There are three complementary elements of an agriculture. So there are three complementary elements of an agriculture and employment-based strategy. The first one is accelerated output growth, and then rising domestic demand, and then non-agricultural rural labor-intensive rural development activities that are supported by farming community. So this is how the agriculture can support the development of an economy. Okay. And then in the next subchapter, we will discuss some progress and challenge for agriculture. Okay. So although agriculture employs the majority of the developing country labor force, it accounts for much lower share of total output. So that is also true. So typically in developing countries, most of the labor force are hired in the agriculture, but the agriculture share of GDP is usually small compared to the share from industry or service field. Okay. And then the second problem is the agricultural production is rising but unevenly. Okay, we will discuss about these two issues more. You can see the figure 9.1 here. This is this show the share of GDP and labor in agriculture. So you can see that the share of GDP and labor in agriculture tend to decline as a country develop, and that is very understandable because as a country develop, they usually start to shift from agriculture to industry, right? So that's why as you can see here, the blue one is the share in labor, meanwhile the black one, the share of GDP from agriculture. You can see that a lot of country exhibit the same pattern here. So as they develop, the share of labor and GDP from agriculture declines. This is the data from 1990 to 2005. You can see some familiar country here, like for example, you have China here, and then you have Brazil. You also can see Nigeria. Even I think Indonesia is in here. This is Indonesia in here. The share of labor decline, right? And then the share in GDP, I saw Indonesia. Just wait a minute. Here. This is Indonesia. Okay. So Indonesia also exhibit a similar pattern. Okay. And then this is the cereal yields by world region. It means so what we mean by cereal here is the harvest of wheat, grain, corn, and things like that. That's the production from the agriculture area, right? So this is the cereal yield by world region from 1960 to 2005. you can see that in developed countries, this one, the developed countries is this one. It seems like it's steadily kind of going up, and then in Asian developing countries, it's this one here, the triangle one. It also exhibit the similar pattern, and then in Latin America they also have a rather similar pattern, although lower. So compared to the developed countries, the Asian and Latin America are lower, and in the sub-Saharan Africa it seems to be a bit stagnant. Okay, so in a way this is the production from the agriculture area. Okay. So let's continue with the challenge and past progress of agriculture growth. So let's discuss specifically about Africa here. So in Africa, the challenge, one of the challenge for the agricultural growth is the malnutrition and famine that happens in Africa. And also we will discuss more specifically the malnutrition and famine that happen because of the new green revolution. So what is the new green revolution? You can check this out in your textbook, but in short, this is a policy where, so the green revolution is a policy where they want to boost in grain production associated with the scientific discovery of new hybrid seed varieties of wheat, rice, and corn that have resulted in high farm yield in many developing countries. So they want to try this new scientific discovery of hybrid seed. But the thing is, it doesn't go well. It didn't go well. So that's why, even though they try the new green revolution, malnutrition and famine still happen in Africa. And the bigger problem than the malnutrition and famine is the market failures. So because of the market failures due to the mishandling of the new green revolution, the food price in Africa during 2010 through 2008, the food price spikes. So because of the food price spike, that's why a lot of people cannot afford food, so they suffer from malnutrition and famine. Okay, and then other than during 2007 through 2008, during 2011 there is another spike in the food prices, still because of the new green revolution. Okay, so we can summarize the challenge for Africa is market failures, and then the poverty alleviation is also not very easy, and then that's why we need to create constructive government role in agriculture. Okay, so that's the challenge in Africa. And then because one of the solution for what has been happening is the government role, let's discuss about the roles for government in agricultural development. Okay, so of course one of the most important roles in government is to overcome externalities and market failure. Okay, so that's why the first role is to take care of environmental externalities. And then the second one is for the agricultural research and extension service, and then for the economies of scale in marketing. So that's very common, that one of the problem in agriculture is the economies of scale in marketing. It's not easy, right, to just market your product when you are in the agriculture area, because it's different with the industry, right? And then the informational asymmetries in product quality. This is also very important, because the agricultural products sometimes they are not standardized. You know, the product from one farms might have different quality from other farms. So that's why the government must assure that the product quality is standardized. And then the next one, of course, the role of government is to provide institution and infrastructure. And then also the government must ensure share growth in agriculture sector. Okay, and then the last one is to address the poverty traps, because in the agriculture area it is often in the rural part of the country, and then the poverty is usually quite severe in the rural part of the country. Okay. Okay, so that's the role of government. And then for the next discussion, we will discuss about structure of agrarian system in developing world. Okay. So this is some agrarian system that we can witness from some of the developing world. So the first one is the tree system of agriculture. So what is the tree system of agriculture? So the system consists of the first one is the agriculture-based country. So the agriculture-based country, they are usually subsistence, but the agriculture makes up large part of growth. Okay. Meanwhile, the second one is transforming countries. Most of world's rural people, large percentage of poverty incidents found there, low contribution of agriculture to growth. Okay, that's the characteristic of transforming countries. And then the last one is urbanized countries. They characterize by half or more even of the poor found in urban areas. So if in the transforming countries, most of the poor population in the rural area, for the urbanized country, most of the poor people are in the urban areas. Okay. Typically, the trend is from the agriculture base to transforming to urbanized economies. So there are some countries in this world who exhibit this pattern. So they, at first, they used to be the agriculture-based country, and then as time goes by, as they grow, as they develop, they become transforming countries, and then they grow and develop more, and then they become urbanized country. Example for this pattern are India, China, Indonesia, and Brazil. The exhibit can be found in the figure 9.3. Okay, so here it is. So let's take a look at, we have India here. India used to be in this point, and then move here, and then we have Indonesia also is moving from this point to this point, and then we also have Brazil here also. As I think it's pretty clear, right? Like for example, in Indonesia, we used to be very agriculture based, but then we start to develop industry, and then we transform. And now it seems like we are heading towards the urbanized countries, right? Like if you go to Jakarta, for example, the poor population in Jakarta is actually quite big, So most of the poor population live in the urban area, not in the rural area. Okay, it seems like we are following that pattern. Okay. I forgot to mention that the x-axis is the rural poor share and the y-axis is the agriculture contribution to growth. Okay. And then this table show the land productivity in developed and developing countries. Let's take a look at one of the developed countries, for example, Japan. So the agricultural productivity is about $39,000, and the average grain yield is about 5,000 kilograms per hectare, and the population is about 128 millions. Meanwhile, let's take a look at Indonesia here. Our agricultural productivity is only about 650 US dollar. It's staggeringly very far from what Japan has, right? And the average grain yield is about 4,500 kilograms per hectare. And our population is actually much bigger than Japan, because I think it's almost twice, because we have 200 million people. So that shows that in developed countries, the agricultural productivity is rather higher than in the developing countries. Okay. Even Brazil is more productive in terms of agriculture than our country. Okay. And as you can see, their population also much smaller than our country. Okay, and then let's continue. And then we will go to the other structure of agrarian in developing world. We will take a look at the structure which is called peasant agriculture, and we can see that in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Okay. So with the peasant agriculture, it has a lot to do with the pattern of land distribution, ownership, and management, and also the social and institutional structure of the agrarian economy. So in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, usually the owner of the land, they do not work in the land or in the farm by themselves. They will hire other people to do it, and they are usually the poor people in the rural area. So that's why they are typically referred to the peasant farmer. So that's why it's called the peasant agriculture. Okay. And in many developing countries, various historical circumstances have led to a concentration of large areas of land in the hands of small class of powerful landowners. So the idea with this peasant agriculture is we have a landowner, and then we have a worker, landowner, and then we have a farmer, worker. Or in bahasa Indonesia, you usually refer it as buruh tani. Nah, that's what I mean by farmer worker or worker farmer. Okay, and then so that's what happened in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. There are some similarities and difference between the Latin America agrarian and Asian agrarian system. Okay, in Latin America, they have what is called latifundio mifundio. That's a dualistic pattern in Latin America. So latifundio and minifundio is basically it's about land holding. With latifundio, it's a huge or very large land holding when they are usually defined as farms large enough to provide employment for more than 12 people, though sometimes it can be very large and then employ thousands. And in contrast, minifundios are the smallest farm. They are defined as farm too small to provide employment for a single family, with typical incomes, markets, and level of technology and capital prevailing in each country or region. So basically, there is this rich farm that can hire a lot of people, and then a very poor farm that cannot even hire people outside their own family. Okay, so this is what happened in Latin America. This is the poor farm. Okay. And then in Asia, there is the fragmented and heavily congested dwarf landholding. So the main idea of this the fragmented and heavily congested dwarf landholding is that's where we have trade-off between using the land for farming or using the land for residence area or using the land for industry. So that's the trade-off that's happened in Asia. And then in Africa, we have the extensive cultivation patterns. Okay. Let's take a look at table 9.2, the distribution of farms and farmland by operational farm size and land tenure status in selected developing countries in Asia and Latin America. Okay, let's take a look at Indonesia, for example. So the average operational farm size is typically only 1.1 hectares, and then the percentage of farms and farmland below 5 hectares are about 67.9 farms and about 68.7 area. And then for the above 50, it seems like we don't have that. I think it's less than 0.05%, and the area is only about 13.6%. And the Gini coefficient of land concentration is about 0.58%, and the percentage of tenanted area in a total farmland for poor Tennessee is about 2.1, and in total it's 23.6, and the percentage share of tenancy in tenanted land is about 60%. Okay. So let's take a look at Brazil, for example. It seems like the agriculture in Brazil is more productive than it is in Indonesia, because their average operational farm size is about almost 60 hectares, and then they have Gini coefficient, it's actually quite high, 0.84 for the Gini coefficient of land concentration. And then they have below 5 hectares farms is only about 36%, and the area is about 1.3%. The above 50 hectares is about 16.3%, and the area is about 84.6%. And in terms of the tenanted area in total farmland, the pure tenancy is about 6.1%, and the total is about 10.2%. Okay. And then we can see a country that still heavily rely on agriculture, like Uruguay here. Their average operational farm size is more than 200 hectares, so that's big, right? Venezuela also, it's about 90. And then if we take a look at Thailand, for example, their average operational farm size is only 3.6%. Okay. And then this is the change in farm size and land distribution for a country based on their farm size. Okay, let's take a look at Pakistan, for example. Thailand, for example, for the small farm size and more inequality. This is the data from 1978 to 1993. The land distribution in terms of Gini, at the beginning it was 43.5, and then at the end it was 46.7, and their average farm size is less than 4 hectares, it seems. And then the total change in the number of farms is 42, in the total area is 27. Okay. Meanwhile, in the country with smaller farm size with less inequality, like India, it seems like their land distribution Gini is about 45, I guess, percent in average, and their farm size is quite small. It's less than 2 hectares, and then the change on the number of farms only 8. The total area is -5. Okay. In Brazil, where they have large farm size and more inequality, their Gini is actually pretty high. It's about 76%, and the size of the farm it's 60 to 70 hectares, and then the change -16 in the total number of farms and -6 in the total area. Meanwhile, in Algeria, where they have large farm size and less inequality, the Gini is from 64 at the beginning, and at the end it was 60. And then the farm size, it's actually increasing from 5.8 to 8.3, and then the total number of farms changed about 40, and the total area changed about 63. Okay, let's discuss more about the structure of agrarian system. And then the next one here, we have the transforming economies, problems of fragmentation and subdivision of peasant land in Asia. Now, this is where we are going to talk about the agrarian system in Asia. So this is we will talk a lot about the difference between land ownership and then those who rent the land. Those who rent the land to use it for farming is called tenant farmers. Meanwhile, those who own the land called the landowner. Okay. So due to the impact of colonial rule in Asia, they strengthened the land tenure system of private property rights and the consequent of rise of money leader. So because the most of the Asian country used to be colonialized, and during the colonialism, they force the private property right. So those who rich and can afford to own the land, they will own the land, and then they will typically rent the land out, and then they will profit from that. Or other than that, they will hire peasant people to work at their farm. Okay. So the contemporary landlordism in India and Pakistan involves absentee landlordism and persistence of sharecroppers and tenant farmers. And the rapid population growth resulted in more fragmentation and peasant impoverism. Okay, the rapid population growth result in more fragmentation and peasant impoverishment. So the idea is, if you are not the landowner, usually you are not in the advantage side of the pattern, right? Because you have to pay the rent, and then you have to bear the risk of the land that you just rent. Meanwhile, the landowner, they usually can profit pretty well because they do not bear the risk. Okay. And then the next one is the agrarian patterns in Latin America. And then apart from the latifundios, like the large holding, like I said before, and the minifundios or the small farms, much production occurs on family farms and medium-sized farm. So we also have the family farm and medium-sized farm. Latifundios are relatively inefficient. Landlords or owners are sometimes less focused on the business of farming, and the large farms typically entail higher transaction costs. So that's the problem with the latifundios. And then overall, the agriculture sector seems to be doing well in many Latin America countries, like for example in Chile and Brazil. So Chile is famous with their innovation in the diversification. Meanwhile, Brazil is famous for their biofuels. If you are curious about their innovation, you can read it in your textbook. Okay, and then the other problem in Latin America is their extreme rural inequalities still persist. Okay, and then the next one is we are going to discuss about the subsistence agriculture and extensive cultivation in Africa. Okay, so the characteristic in the agriculture in Africa is they have low productivity due to the lack of technology, and then there is a shifting cultivation, and then the seasonal demand for labor depending on rainy season. So weather is a big issue here because their agriculture system is very traditional. So the weather can be a big problem. If you have a good technology in agriculture, the weather might not be as big as problem. And then they also have high dependence on unimproved seeds sown on unfertilized and then rain-fed fields. We cannot ignore the fact that the geography landscape in Africa might not be very suitable for advanced farming system or advanced agriculture system, right? So that's why they are in a very disadvantaged area here. And then the next one is the relative high fraction of underutilized land. The Africa also have the problem with the underutilized land, but it is understandable. Like I said before, it's not easy to doing farming and agriculture in a geographic landscape like in Africa. Okay, and then the next one is high concern about climate change impact. And then the next one is the need for an African new green revolution. There are hopeful signs that it is getting underway. Okay, so if the new green revolution can be handled better than before, it might be a good alternative for Africa. Okay. And then when we talk about agriculture and the agriculture role in growth, we must also talk about the important role of women. Why? Because women provide 60% to 80% of agriculture labor in Africa, Asia, and 40% in Latin America. Okay, so a lot of workers in the agriculture area are women. Okay, and then women work longer hours than men, and the government assistance programs tend to reach men, not women, and this is a problem that we have to address. The government assistance, they usually tend to reach men. There is a reason for that, because typically the head of the household is men, right? So that's why the government assistance program usually reach men. But I think this could be a very misleading mindset, because there are also large number of family, especially in the poor family, where the head of the family is actually woman. So this is something that we need to think about, and this is something that we need to improve. The government assistance should reach both men and women equally, not just men. Okay. And then this figure, in the figure 9.4, you can see the expansion of modern inputs in world's developing region. Okay. The first one here is the irrigation. You can see that the x-axis here, the share of arable and permanent cropland. You can see that it seems like in sub-Saharan Africa it's not very large. Meanwhile, the South Asia really benefit from the irrigation. Okay, and then the next one is the improved varieties of cereals and the share of cereal areas. It seems like the one that benefit the most from this improved varieties of cereal is the East Asian and Pacific. Okay. And then the next one is the fertilizer consumption. The one that consume fertilizer the most is in East Asia and Pacific. Okay. Okay. And then the next one is the microeconomics of farmer behavior and agricultural development. We will discuss about farmer behavior. So the characteristic of farmer in the subsistence farming are they usually risk aversion, and then there is uncertainty, and the survival is very much the goal of the subsistence farming. So the survival here means that you need to farm in order to survive, because in the subsistence you will harvest. What you harvest is going to be what you consume. So the goal is the survival of the family, or the survival of the farmers. Okay. And there are some other characteristic of the subsistence farming. The traditional neoclassical model of profit maximization with certainty is not adequate in terms of subsistence farming. And then the price, weather, and other uncertainty, along with the limited access to credit and insurance, largely explains the extent of risk-averse behavior. So the reason why most of farmers in the subsistence farming are risk-averse is because they face a lot of uncertainty in terms of price, weather, and also they cannot access credit and insurance. So that's why the risk is just too high. So that's why they are very risk-averse. And then the risk-averse subsistence farming, often not irrationally, can prefer technologies that combine low mean per hectare with low variance of alternative, high yielding but high risk technology. So because they are very risk-averse, they would choose the low technology rather than high technology. Okay, even though if they choose the higher technology, they might have better harvest. But because they are risk averse, they avoid the high technology. Okay, and then the efforts to minimize risk and remove commercial and institutional obstacle to small farmer innovation are necessary. So because of the things that I just mentioned to you, the effort to minimize risk and remove commercial and institutional obstacle must be applied in order to help the farmer in the subsistence farming. Okay, innovation is also necessary. Okay. In the figure 9.5, you can see the small farmer attitudes toward trees. So this is the illustration why it is sometimes rational to resist innovation and change. So like I just said before, the subsistence farmer or small farmer, they usually avoid innovation or high technology because they worry about the risk. Okay, and it is illustrated by the following figure. So in the x-axis we have time, the y-axis we have output and consumption, and we have farmer A here and then farmer B here, and then you can see that. So it seems like the farmer A here choose the low technology. With the low technology, the farmer A's family minimum consumption requirement, which is this dash line here, is met. But if, like for example, farmer B choose the high technology, then the minimum desirable consumption level does not met with the output. So the output is the straight line, the dash line is the desirable consumption. So that's why subsistence farmers tend to choose the low technology. Okay, and then figure 9.6, the crop yield probability densities of two different farming techniques. So with the this is interesting. So the x-axis is the crop yield and the y-axis is the probability. If you use the technique B, you will have the crop yield not very high, the probability. So here we have technique B and then technique A. The technique B is actually the rather high technique, and the technique A is the low one. So with technique B, you will have more varieties of the crop yield, right? So in this point, for example, your crop yield, there is a probability that it won't yield at all, and then in this point it might yield, but who knows. So that's why the risk-averse farmer usually do not choose this technique, even though it is higher technology. They will choose the technique A, even though it will only yield during this during this time only, compared to the technique B that might yield all the time. But the technique A is less risky because in this time it is guaranteed that the crop will yield, okay, because the probability of the crop yield is very high in here. So that's why risk-averse farmers typically will choose technique A. Okay, and then the next one we will discuss incentive under sharecropping. So this is the sharecropping. So let's take a look at the figure. In the x-axis you have labor. This is working hour, yeah. So we can define this as working hour. And then in the y-axis we have value per unit labor. So if for example a farmer doesn't doesn't do sharecropping, basically what we mean by sharecropping is they share the land, okay. They share the land to bear the risk together, because if they do not share, then someone who work in the land, then they will then that person will bear the risk all by himself. Okay, if a farmer isn't sharing, then they will work until their value marginal product is satisfied. So they will, like for example, put an effort in LF. So their effort will be in LF. But if they share cropping, then they will not get the whole value marginal product. Why? Because they share. Remember, like for example, they share for half and half, then they will only get half of the VMPL. Okay. So basically, if we put gamma as the notation for the share, then when they share, a farmer will only have a gamma times their FMPL. Okay, if they will only get part of the FMPL or the gamma times FMPL, then there is no incentive to put high effort. So they will put less effort. That is LS in here. So that's the incentive of under sharecropping. So it's more like a disincentive instead of incentive. So actually the incentive is they will share the risk. They will share the risk. But there is also disincentive. Disincentive. They will put less effort, because they will get smaller profit, right? So they will put less effort. Okay. Actually, there is a long debate regarding sharecropping. We will discuss some of it, but if you are curious, you can read it in your textbook. So there are some issues in sharecropping. There has been a long debate. The first issue is intrinsically inefficient due to the poor incentive. Yeah, like I just said before, the incentive is not really good actually. And then there is monitoring approach where we need to monitor people who share crop, because if they are not monitored, then they will have moral hazard. And then the compromise between two types of risk. Stiglitz said that in order for the sharecropping to work, then there must be compromise between two types of risk. And then there is this screening argument. If high ability, then take pure rental. So if the farmer have high ability, then why would they do sharecropping? Just rent a land and then work in there. And then there is empirical evidence for inefficiency from Ali Shaban, where he compares same farmer and then controlling for the soil. And then the last one, giving sharecroppers a larger share of the produce and security of tenure on land can increase efficiency. So one of the solution to increase efficiency is to give the sharecroppers large share of the produce and security of tenure on land. Okay. And then the other issue is there is issue in interlocking factor markets. Okay, so interlocking factor markets, what it means is if the factor markets whose supply function are interdependent frequently because different outputs are provided by the same suppliers who exercise monopolistic or oligopolistic control over resource. Okay, basically it's market failure in the factor market. Okay, market failure due to oligopolistic or monopolistic. Okay, and then the next one. So we just discussed, right, that subsistence farmer or small farmers are very disadvantaged and they are typically poor, and we want to make them better, right? We want them to have better quality of life. But we have to understand that it's neither realistic nor necessarily desirable to think of instantly transforming traditional agrarian system that has prevailed for many generations into a highly specialized commercial farming system. So that's why we have to do it step by step. We can start by the transition to mixed and diversified farming. Okay, what does that mean? It means that we can suggest the farmers that they could produce both staple crops and cash crops. And simple animal husbandry, typical of the first stage in the transition from subsistence to specialized farming. So the subsistence farmer, they typically only produce staple crops. Now we can introduce the cash crops, like they can produce staple crops from themselves and then cash crops to be sold in the market, and then they can also do animal husbandry, and before they can specialize, they can do specialized farming. Okay, and that's the next one, from divergence to specialization, modern commercial farming. Okay, so the specialized farm represents the final and the most advanced stage of individual holding in a mixed market economy. It is the most prevalent type of farming in advanced industry nation, and it has evolved in response to and parallel with development in other areas and national economy. So in the long term, we expect the small farmer can take a role in the modern commercial farming, and this will definitely have an impact for development. Okay. Okay, and this is the core requirements of a strategy of agricultural and rural development. The first one is we have to understand that the need for improving small-scale agriculture with the technology and innovation, and then institutional and pricing policies, providing necessary economic incentive, and then adapting to new opportunities and new constraints. And then the second one, we have to understand the need for condition for rural development. We have to take care of the issue of land reform, supportive policy, and the integrated development objective. Okay, so this is integrated. It means we care about industry, but also agriculture, also the service area. Okay, so that the development and the growth can cover everyone, not just some of the rich people. Okay, so these are some concepts to review. You can review it in your textbook. So I think that's it for this session. See you in the next session.